Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. It is fashionable rage against Big Pharma. Bernie Sanders, for one, does it all the time. So does just about everyone else on my side of the aisle, that is, us Democrats. But my life was saved by Big Pharma. And in the current coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, Big Pharma just may save yours. Here's what's happening. 9 drugs and drug combinations are being tested for effectiveness in dealing with the novel coronavirus that produces the illness that the Center for Disease Control calls coronavirus disease and nicknames COVID-19. 4 of these drugs are being tested in a grand international effort put together by the World Health Organization. Most are drugs that were developed for other purposes, like the treatment of AIDS and malaria. Many are readily available in the marketplace and have been around for years. Now the trick is to answer a question. Are any of these drugs effective against COVID-19? Or is that effectiveness merely wishful thinking? Double-blind studies are now either being set up or are being run to answer that question. Where do these drugs that may save you from COVID-19 come from? Big Pharma. And from mid-sized pharma, from smaller companies that want to be part of Big Pharma, that want to break into Big Pharma by having a wildly successful drug and making a fortune. First off, there's Actemra, a pneumonia drug by the Big Pharma giant Roche. Then there's Rebif, a multiple sclerosis drug from the Big Pharma Goliath Merck. That's followed by a combination, hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. Hydrochloroquine comes from one drug giant, Novartis, in Basel, Switzerland, and azithromycin comes from Pfizer, a drug giant headquartered in New York and in Secaucus, New Jersey. Pfizer says it will donate millions of doses of azithromycin for free if the drug is approved for COVID-19 use. Then come the Big Pharma wannabes, companies that are hoping one of their drugs becomes so useful that it sells for decades. The first of the drugs coming from the young hopefuls is remdesivir, a 10-year-old antiviral drug from the California company Gilead Pharmaceuticals, a drug that's been waiting 10 years for an illness to come along that it can conquer. Next comes chloroquine, an anti-malarial drug from Rising Pharmaceuticals in New Jersey. And there's a close chloroquine relative, hydroxychloroquine sulfate, from Israel's Teva Pharmaceuticals. Teva has volunteered to donate millions of pills for free to American hospitals to aid the United States in this crisis. If its drug, hydroxychloroquine sulfate, proves effective against COVID-19. Next comes the anti-flu drug favipiravir from Toyoma Chemical, a part of the Fuji Film Group in Japan. Yes, Fuji Film, the folks who make film for pre-digital cameras. Then there's Coletra, a combination drug made up of lopinavir and ritonavir. This one is used against HIV. Its maker is the drug company AbbVie, based in Lake Bluff, Illinois. What do these drugs have in common? You and I may get access to them thanks to the capitalist desire to make money. 4 of these drugs are from Big Pharma. The others are from smaller companies hoping to become members of Big Pharma. Roughly 4 of these companies will donate millions of these drugs for free in this global COVID-19 crisis. How do I know from personal experience that Big Pharma can save your life? Because Big Pharma saved mine. In 1988, I was in my 20th year of a scientific expedition into a territory I'd known nothing about, popular culture. I'd founded the biggest PR firm in the music industry and had engineered crucial parts of the careers of Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, Billy Joel, Simon and Garfunkel, Billy Idol, Peter Gabriel, David Byrne, Queen, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Joan Jett, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, Chaka Khan, and a host of others. Plus, I had failed to be effective for people like Kiss and Kenny Loggins, which bothered the hell out of me. Nonetheless, I had helped generate $27 billion in revenues for my clients, more than the gross domestic product of Luxembourg or Qatar, and I'd done it by not giving a shit about money, but by focusing on a mystery, soul, focusing on something I called the gods inside. The gods inside of you and me. Again, the whole story is an Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, my upcoming book. But the techniques I'd invented were so successful that I'd been the subject of 20 pages in the Billboard Guide to Music Publicity, a college textbook. The focus of those 20 pages was on what I called perceptual engineering, something I wanted to make sure was used for good, not evil. And I had run across evil, the evil that killed Michael Jackson. The whole story, as I said, of those rock and roll adventures and my attempt to defeat rock's evils is in my upcoming book, Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll. Then on March 10th, 1988, I was hit with a bizarre illness. First, I was so weak for 3 months that I was as limp as a leaf of boiled spinach, so weak that my mind was unplugged and I could lay on my bed all day and stare at the ceiling in perfect bliss. But I could not get any further than the bedroom 5 feet from my bedroom door. The bathroom 5 feet from my bedroom door. That passed after 3 months and I thought I was better. I was wrong. Something was wacky in my thermoregulatory system. I shivered with cold when it was 98 degrees Fahrenheit, and I perspired as if it was a heat wave when the temperature went down to 50 or 60. I had to take meetings laying on the couch of Cyndi Lauper's manager or on the couch of the president of Island Records. Then came the straw that broke the camel's back. I had to go out to the Meadowlands, an open-air football stadium in New Jersey, on a cold fall day to see one of my bands, the Scorpions, open for Metallica. The audience was on its feet the whole time. So to see, I had to be on my feet too. And we were outdoors, so I was being popsicled, frozen. Then I had to head back to Manhattan to see John Cougar Mellencamp perform at Madison Square Garden. And finally, I had to take a cab out to Queens to see Cyndi Lauper get an honorary diploma from the high school she'd been kicked out of. That day finished me off. A few days later, I dragged myself into my 2-story Manhattan office, called the staff into my room, told them I didn't know what I had, but for all that I knew I was dying, and handed them the business so I could go home to my bedroom. The next day, I got a call from one of my best competitors on the West Coast offering me $350,000 for the business. That's $750,000 in today's money. I told him it was too late. I'd already given the business to my staff. By the time I took to my bed, I was too weak to speak and too weak to have another person in the room with me. That lasted 5 years. Meanwhile, my wife convinced a chronic fatigue syndrome specialist to visit me in my bedroom one night after he and his fiancée had attended a party near me in my Park Slope, Brooklyn brownstone. The most important 2 things the doctor gave me were these. He became my CFS doctor, something it had been impossible for me to find since I couldn't leave my bedroom except to get to the bathroom. In other words, he was a doctor willing to work with me via email, way back in 1995 when only a tiny number of us were on email. And just as important, he took a slip of paper, wrote an email address on it, handed it to me, said it was the address of one of his patients in Texas and that I should reach out to her. I did. And together, the 2 of us went through chronic fatigue syndrome newsletters and internet outlets looking for what are called treatment modalities. I don't know how many drugs we researched, but after years of trial and error, 2 drugs would prove to be effective. One is called the love hormone, oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hormone that makes us feel warm and fuzzy toward each other. It's involved in the love that generates romance, sex, kids, and families. And it's involved in the trust and interdependence that builds economies. Remember, trust is a word you used to see in the names of banks all over the place. The First Bank and Trust Company, the U.S. Trust, the Atlantic Trust, Irving Trust, and Northern Trust, not to mention the Fidelity Bank and Trust. Fidelity and trust, those are both oxytocin emotions. But legally, oxytocin was used to induce only one thing, labor. Using it for CFS was a minor crime. It's called off-label use. That crime would help save me. And where did my oxytocin come from? A mid-sized drug company in New Jersey called Pharma that's willing to put out generic drugs that would bankrupt most companies. Then there's gabapentin. Gabapentin was not designed for CFS either. It was designed to stop epileptic convulsions. Using it for anything else was also a minor crime. But this illegal use of gabapentin increased my strength, little by little, day by day. Finally, a combination of 30 drugs and supplements got me out of my bed and functioning normally. In fact, functioning better than normally. The minute-by-minute hell of a clinical depression that I'd lived through since I was a child was gone. And I suspect that gabapentin was my antidepressant. How do I know gabapentin was the tentpole in this recovery? CFS had taught me to sense boundaries before I could reach them. If I failed to do that, the dragon of CFS punished me with 3 months back in bed, too weak to do anything but type on my keyboard, if I was lucky enough to be able to do that. But I was invited to keynote the Global Entertainment and Media Summit in LA. Flying from New York to LA was taking a big chance, but I did it, and it was a tremendous success. Then I was invited to address an international conference of quantum physicists in Moscow. Now look, I'd started in theoretical physics and microbiology at the age of 10, so this was like a homecoming for me. So I decided to take the risk on overextending myself and go. On the plane to our connecting flight in Germany, I was exuberant. I was energetic as hell. Then we switched to the plane to Moscow, and midway through the Moscow flight, I crashed. My chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms came back big time. I became as weak as a dead jellyfish. When we arrived at the Moscow airport, I desperately needed a place to lie down. The airport was filled with Kalashnikov-toting, uniformed military men. This was not a warm and friendly place for a seriously weakened man to search for a bed. But my assistant found an infirmary where they were willing to let me lay down in exchange for taking my passport, making me a non-human and opening me to disappear for a few years into a gulag. I was desperate, so I handed over my passport to a bunch of people who did not even speak English and who did not look kind. Meanwhile, the back of my brain had been working on the solution to a problem. Why had my energy disappeared? And why had it disappeared so suddenly? The back of my brain had also come up with a guess, a hypothesis. I'd been so excited on the flight to Germany that I'd lost track of the time. Normally, I took my 30 pills for the first time at 8 o'clock in the morning and for the second time at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. But I hadn't noticed 4 p.m. slide by. Laying there in the Moscow infirmary, I had a hunch. I asked my assistant to open my suitcase and dig through the hanging closet shoe bag with my 30 drugs instead of shoes in it, looking for the gabapentin. I took my afternoon dose, 6 pills. Within 15 minutes, the CFS symptoms were gone, my energy was back, and I felt stronger than I had when I was 19. My assistant packed up the suitcase, I collected my passport, and we walked out of the airport and caught a cab to the pension, the pension, 50 miles outside of Moscow, where the conference of quantum physicists from 11 time zones was taking place. My battle with the head of the conference over paying the conference fees with my credit card, which he thought was theft, is another story for another time. But thanks to gabapentin, I had the strength for it. Am I grateful for oxytocin and gabapentin? You bet. Today I do 1,220 pseudo push-ups, a sort of vibrational planking, 5 days a week, and I walk 6 miles a day. Thanks to 2 pharmaceutical companies, Parke-Davis, a subsidiary of Pfizer, a core part of Big Pharma, and to Par Pharmaceuticals, a company too small to be part of Big Pharma, but one that Bernie Sanders and his brigade might hate anyway. You may be just as grateful to these companies tomorrow if any of their 9 candidate drugs work to cure you of COVID-19. This is Howard Bloom speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. Howard Bloom. And now, for that terrible, insidious, sleazy, slimy, sneaky, impossible to find little off button, I've got it.